Well, so that leads me to this. You both are active with United for East Palestine. So could you tell our audience just a little bit more about that briefly and your and what that means and what you're trying to do to kind of solve this access, in other words, access to testing and things like that.
Yeah,
Proper.
for sure. And it initially started as just a way to like Alex had said, to really rally support from a resources perspective, water, whatever we could get from a community aid perspective is where it started. But as it started to unravel more and we found how deep and broken the response to this issue is, it's turned more into fighting for the truth. And so we are funding or attempting to fundraise for independent testing. Alex, do you want to elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah. So as Jenna said, that it's kind of warped into sort of our main function is what we're trying to do to give a little bit of perspective on why it's important. So we think of this because this has sort of been branded as the East Palestine train wreck. It happened in East Palestine. So we think of it as East Palestine and Ohio as that's kind of the area that needs to be focused on, and that those the people in East Palestine are the ones who've been impacted. But the thing is, chemicals and particulate matter and fallout from toxic chemical explosions don't follow borders or city names.
Mhm.
Pennsylvania, for example, is not even 1 mile away from where the train derailed. There are people in Pennsylvania who were just as impacted in the immediate fallout zone as people in East Palestine.
I didn't know that.
Moreover, yeah, that's something that a lot of people aren't aware of, but that's a huge part of the story. There's people in Pennsylvania are just as impacted by this, and most people don't even know that they were even impacted at all. But to a little more in terms of why the testing is so important.
Mhm.
So Norfolk Southern, their interest is in making this leave people's minds as soon as possible. It is in minimizing what actually happened because that minimizes their culpability in any sort of injury. Not just, and I mean, there's obviously the civil lawsuit aspect that's going to happen. They're going to get sued and they're going to sell out however many tens of millions of dollars they have to. But to them, that's just the cost of doing business. They've already accepted that that's going to happen, I suspect. But the thing is, poisoning someone is a felony.
Mhm.
Poisoning a group of people is a group of felonies. A felony for each time you poison them, for each person you try to poison. Poisoning an entire town is terrorism.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about them poisoning a town. We have models and a lot of empirical data that indicates very strongly that this plume of toxic chemicals is impacting literally millions of people. We are getting accounts from people all across the Northeast, from New York to Ontario, Canada, to Connecticut, of the exact same symptoms, of chemical sheen like was in the rivers flowing right from out of the snowmelt in mass in Ontario, Canada.
Mhm.
People's pets falling sick, just like the pets are falling sick in East Palestine. There is
Mhm.
a large amount of evidence that needs to be looked into, which indicate that Norfolk Southern didn't just poison the people of East Palestine; it poisoned the entire Northeast, and that is something that they know that. If okay, let me backtrack. If that is the case, and there is a large amount of anecdotal evidence to think that it is, they know that, right? So their interest is in preventing that from ever coming out. They don't want any proof, any viable scientific evidence to actually be produced that can prove that. Right now, there's TikToks and there's videos, but there's no there's no credentialed scientific body or academic body producing any data that actually proves it. And as long as that's the case, as far as they're concerned, it didn't happen. So their interest is in preventing that story from being told, preventing any of that from happening, and to minimize the story to as small as they can possibly make it, to make it not Pennsylvania, to make it just about East Palestine, so that any sort of efforts that happen to get people evacuated, and then even then minimizing those, because they want to keep the story as small as possible, which is why people are smelling these chemicals, and any toxicologist with who's honest and has a knowledge, like for instance, Dr. Beatrice Galam, one of the most respected toxicologists, medical researchers in the United States, will tell you that if you can smell a toxic chemical, you are already over the exposure limit. You have already gotten too much into your system. And if you're smelling it day by day by day by day, a lot of those chemicals actually concentrate inside your body. And moreover, besides just the acute injury of being exposed and what those chemicals do on the acute level, there's something called oxidation, which is basically when these chemicals can cause the creation of what they call free radicals, which is when your body, because of because of a reaction that happens when a chemical that shouldn't be there is exposed to it, it causes your body to start attacking itself, and it can do that in ways that are impossible to predict, from things like diabetes to lupus and all other types of autoimmune disorders. And all of these things are concerns that will need to be watched out for. But as long as they can obfuscate about what is actually happening in the first place, when people start getting sick with these tertiary things, they can say that it's not related. And they will say, prove it. And then the evidence is it's upon them to present the evidence, but they don't have the medical testing, right? So, which is why it's so important for us to find out what chemicals were not just released, not just what chemicals were in the cars, but what chemicals were created in the fire, at what concentration and how much were they released, how far did they go, what's the actual immediate impact zone? Because right now it's looking like it goes all the way from Kentucky all the way to Ontario, Canada, and from Maine all the way to, I don't know, Cincinnati, maybe. I don't know how far east and west, but north and south, we have a fairly good idea, and we have models that show it going possibly all the way to Greenland. So this is such a gigantic problem, and we are hearing stories of everybody in that, so many people in that area getting intensely sick, and without the ability to do toxicology reports to find out what's in their blood, to find out they're being exposed, we can't prove that. But if we can get all the data we need to find out exactly what chemicals are in the water and soil around East Palestine or around the train derailment site, what chemicals they made and released in the immediate impact zone, and B, get the sampling and the chemical data of what is coming down in the snow or in the snow and the acid rain that is being documented all across there. If we can get that data, get that chemical testing, we can then prove not just a correlation, but a direct causation by saying that these chemicals were released and they're appearing here and here and on the direct time zone. Once we have that, and the time limit for getting that is limited, because a lot of these chemicals break down rather quickly. They're breaking down the snow, they're melting in the snow, and they're breaking down, they're going into the rivers and the creeks, at which point it will become much, much more difficult, if not impossible, to get the samples to prove it. And that's what they want. They want it to become impossible to objectively prove that they are directly responsible. And if you can prove it, then you have the ability to actually hold them accountable, which is what I think needs to happen.
And this is the railroad company itself that needs to be held accountable.
Absolutely.
Okay.